The day Victoria Hale fired me, I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg. I just stood there, staring at the woman who taught me everything about power and how easily it can crush you. Hale Interiors wasn't just any firm. It was the firm. The kind of place where you worked 70-hour weeks just for the privilege of saying you did. The office smelled like coffee and ambition, all marble floors, cold lighting, and perfect people in perfect clothes. I joined right out of design school, wide-eyed and desperate to prove myself, and Victoria had noticed me early. She used to tell me I reminded her of herself. Hungry, she said, but not yet dangerous. I worked under her for 4 years, doing everything from scrubbing paint samples off floors to creating full design presentations she'd later take credit for. I told myself that was just how it worked. Apprentices learn by watching, by serving, by staying quiet. And I was good at staying quiet. Until that Thursday morning. She called me into her glass-walled office, the one with the city skyline stretched out behind her like a trophy case, and gestured for me to sit. Her tone was soft, almost kind, and that scared me more than if she'd shouted. "There's been a problem," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "The Dover Hotel project. You missed a deadline." I frowned, flipping through the papers, confused. The dates didn't line up. I hadn't missed anything. "That's impossible," I said. "I submitted everything last week." She gave a little sigh, the kind that said she'd already decided I was guilty. "The client sent the wrong files back, Eleanor. You were supposed to catch it." My name in her mouth sounded like a mistake. I tried to explain, to show her the time-stamped emails, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes were already on the clock, calculating how long this conversation needed to last before she could get back to her lunch meeting. "You're talented," she said finally, "but this is a serious error. It's not personal." That's what they always say before they ruin you. It's not personal. But it is. Every layoff, every betrayal, every knife in the back starts with that lie. She stood, offering her hand like we were closing a deal, and I realized it was already over. I walked out of her office in a daze, past rows of coworkers pretending not to look. The air in the elevator felt heavier than usual, like even the building pitied me. By the time I reached the lobby, security had already disabled my keycard. I stepped outside into the city rain, holding a cardboard box filled with pieces of my life. A plant, a coffee mug, a stack of sketches that weren't even mine anymore. Cars splashed past, and the whole world kept moving while mine stopped. I remember thinking how quiet New York can feel when you've just lost everything. I wandered for hours that night, ending up in a 24-hour diner off Lexington. The waitress poured me coffee without asking, and I sat there until sunrise, staring at my reflection in the window. I didn't know what to do next. My rent was due in a week. My bank account held barely enough for groceries. I had no backup plan. And worse, no confidence left. Victoria had been right about one thing. I wasn't ready to lead. I was just good at surviving under someone else's power. But that night, between the exhaustion and the bitterness, something changed. I started writing names on a napkin. Clients I'd worked with, vendors who liked me, tiny connections I'd made that were mine, not hers. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about escape, about rebuilding, even if it meant starting from dust. Because if there's one thing Victoria never understood, it's that people like me, the ones who clean up the mess, who stay late, who get blamed for everything, we learn faster than anyone else. We don't burn out, we harden. I paid for my coffee, stepped back into the morning light, and made myself a promise. One day, I'd walk into an office just like hers. Same glass walls, same skyline view, only this time I'd be the one on the other side of the desk. I didn't know how I'd get there, but I would. And when I did, I wouldn't need to fire anyone to prove I'd made it. The work itself would be the revenge. Starting over was harder than losing the job. When you fall from a tower you helped build, you don't hit the ground right away. You just keep falling, thinking maybe the air will catch you. Those first months were nothing but air. My savings ran out in weeks, the rent notice turned red, and the city that once felt full of opportunity became a maze of closed doors. I tried applying to other firms, but Victoria's name still carried weight. Everyone admired her and assumed I'd been fired for incompetence. I stopped sending resumes and started surviving. I sold my couch, my jewelry, even my father's old watch to buy a used laptop. Days blurred into nights at cheap diners with free Wi-Fi, sketching ideas on napkins between job listings. Still, I couldn't stop designing. It was the only thing that made me feel like myself. I began posting small projects online, a remodeled studio apartment, a coffee shop redesign done entirely in Photoshop, color boards that cost me nothing but imagination. At first, no one noticed. Then one morning, I woke up to hundreds of notifications. A lifestyle blog had reposted one of my mood boards with the caption, "Design should feel like home." It went viral in a tiny, unexpected way, just enough to make strangers curious about who I was. I built a portfolio site overnight, called it Eleanor & Co. because & company sounded bigger than just me. Within a week, a cafe owner messaged asking if I could redesign his place for a modest fee. I said yes. That project changed everything. I spent nights sanding tables, painting walls myself, choosing lighting from discount warehouses. When it reopened, people lined up down the block. The local paper ran a small feature, "Unknown Designer Revives Brooklyn Cafe." 10 new inquiries followed, then 20. I took every job no matter how small, restaurants, apartments, even a hair salon with a $600 budget. Every space became a story, every client a chance to prove Victoria wrong. Sleep was a rumor back then. I lived on caffeine and adrenaline, learning contracts and accounting from YouTube tutorials, building a business out of scraps. 6 months later, I hired an assistant, a nervous girl fresh out of college named Marcy, who reminded me of myself. The first time she handed me a project plan and apologized for typos, I smiled and said, "Don't worry, you're learning fast." No one had ever told me that when I started, but I promised myself I'd be the kind of boss I once needed. A year passed. Eleanor & Co. was no longer a dream. It was a studio with 3 employees, repeat clients, and a reputation for turning small spaces into living art. I stopped comparing myself to Victoria until her name surfaced again in gossip I couldn't ignore. Her firm slipping, someone said at an event. Big clients pulling out. She's difficult. I pretended not to care, but inside I felt something between satisfaction and sadness. The universe has its own sense of timing. 2 years to the day after she fired me, I received an email from an international development group planning a luxury hotel in Manhattan. They'd seen my cafe work and wanted Eleanor & Co. to lead the interior design. It was the biggest project of my life. Multi-million-dollar budget, multiple partners. I scrolled through the collaboration list to see which firms would be involved, and there it was, like a ghost. Hale Interiors. I read it 3 times to be sure. Victoria's company. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, heart pounding, the past pressing hard against my ribs. Then I smiled. I signed the contract. On the morning of the first coordination meeting, I walked into a glass conference room overlooking the skyline wearing a tailored blazer that felt like armor. My assistant introduced me. Eleanor Adams, Creative Director, Eleanor & Co. The title sounded unreal in my own ears. Victoria was already seated at the far end of the table, reviewing documents. When she looked up and saw me, her pen slipped from her hand. For a split second, neither of us moved. The room buzzed with quiet conversation, unaware of the earthquake between us. I met her eyes and gave a polite nod, professional, distant, unshakable. In that moment, I realized something. Revenge isn't a firestorm. It's walking calmly into the room they never imagined you'd own. When I walked into that meeting room, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like symmetry. The kind of balance life rarely gives you, but sometimes allows you to earn. Victoria Hale sat at the far end of the glass conference table, surrounded by architects, executives, and project managers. Her posture still flawless, her confidence rehearsed. For a second, she didn't recognize me. Not really. Not the woman sitting across from her now in a tailored suit, holding her own portfolio instead of carrying someone else's. Then her eyes widened, and I watched it happen. The flicker of disbelief, the flash of calculation, and finally, the smallest trace of fear. She recovered quickly, because people like her always do. "Eleanor," she said, forcing a smile. "It's been a while." Her voice was the same, smooth, composed, polished for power. "It has," I replied evenly, sliding my notes across the table. "I believe Hale Interiors is handling logistics for our Manhattan project." She hesitated just long enough for the room to notice. "That's correct," she said. "We're honored to collaborate." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded and began the presentation, every word clear, every concept tight. Years ago, I used to shake in rooms like this. Now the silence between my sentences worked for me. People listened. Even she listened. When the meeting ended, she approached me privately, tone softer. "You've built something impressive, Eleanor." I thanked her. No sarcasm, just calm acknowledgement. Because the truth was, I had. But seeing her there, the same woman who'd once called me replaceable, it didn't fill me with pride. It filled me with peace. Over the next few months, we saw each other often. She tried to regain control, slipping in compliments that doubled as probes. "How do you manage such rapid growth? You've done well for yourself." I answered politely but distantly. The balance had shifted, and she felt it. In meetings, she deferred to me. In emails, her tone changed from commands to requests. I didn't punish her for it. I simply let her feel what it was like to depend on someone she once dismissed. One night, after a long design review, she lingered as the team packed up. "You know," she said, voiced quieter than I'd ever heard, "I didn't fire you because you weren't good enough. I fired you because you were too good. You were becoming me." I met her gaze and smiled faintly. "You were right," I said. "You taught me everything I needed to know." The silence after that felt like closure. Heavy, final, clean. When the project was complete, Eleanor & Co. landed the cover of Architectural Digest. My name was printed in bold across a skyline I'd once only seen through her office window. Hale Interiors was listed in small print at the bottom, subcontracted for materials. The world didn't know what that meant, but she did. A month later, I heard her firm had downsized. Rumors said she was taking a sabbatical. Maybe she was. Maybe she was tired of fighting the system she used to control. I didn't feel the urge to celebrate. I had already moved on. Success, I'd learned, wasn't loud. It didn't need revenge speeches or poetic justice scenes. It was quiet, steady, and undeniable. It spoke through work, through patience, through the kind of consistency that people like Victoria never had. Sometimes when I drive past that old building, the one where she fired me, I still slow down. The lobby looks smaller now. Maybe it's because I'm no longer the woman carrying a box of her belongings, wondering what went wrong. Maybe it's because once you've rebuilt yourself, the places that broke you lose their power. I don't hate her anymore. In a strange way, I'm grateful. If she hadn't ended my career, I'd still be waiting for permission to start my own. If she hadn't closed the door, I'd never have built a door of my own. And that's the thing about people like her. They mistake control for strength. They think firing you ends the story, but sometimes it's just the first chapter of something better. The last time I saw Victoria was at an industry gala. She was polite, older, quieter. We talked briefly, just two professionals making small talk. As I turned to leave, she touched my arm lightly and said, "You really did become me, didn't you?" I smiled, shaking my head. "No, Victoria," I said. "I became what you could have been if you'd remembered where you started." Then I walked away, not with anger, not with pride, but with peace. The kind that comes when you realize you didn't just survive the fire, you built something beautiful from its ashes. And that's when I understood. Real revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's living so well that you forget they ever doubted you.